On board, it was 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war. What was the reason behind this attack?
I think this was probably a miscommunication on the Ukrainian side. They didn't keep the frontline troops properly informed about an impending prisoner transfer. Because if you recall, when this plane was initially downed, the Ukrainians were celebrating. Oh, look what we did. Great. Oh, man, we were kicking Russian ass. They were just out of their minds with joy. And then all of a sudden, once they realized they had shot down a plane full of Ukrainian POWs, they started erasing those messages on social media. Why would you do that? I mean, initially you're proud. Now you're no longer proud. And then they started creating, this lying, flat out lying about, oh, it was the Russians. Oh, this was a plot by Russia. So we really don't know whether it was sheer incompetence or intentional. But when all is said and done, they've killed 65 of their own. They killed 6 Russians, and they used an American Patriot missile battery reportedly to do it, and did it on Russian territory. So there's going to be, the Russians aren't going to forget this, and there's going to be some blowback on the United States because of it.
Who's operating these missile systems? Are Ukrainians or mercenaries there who are operating this type of weapons?
Yeah, I think it's highly likely that it's more foreign mercenaries that are trained to do it. It's possible that it was Ukrainians. But, that's one of the reasons we saw these, those former French legionnaires who were now no longer legionnaires, but they're housed in this, upscale hotel, and there are, over, around 200 of them there, I think. So this is not just a ragtag group of guys that decided they wanted to get together and play war. So it's one of the shortfalls that Ukraine has is its lost trained manpower, people experienced in how to deal with air defense systems, as well as artillery, like the 155 millimeter, whether it's a M777 or the Caesar, or tanks. So the Ukraine's in a position where if it wants to keep some of this equipment operating, it increasingly needs to rely upon foreigners to do it for them.
Larry, you think that this was purely a failure of intelligence on the part of Ukrainians to hit this plane?
No, I don't think so much a failure of intelligence as a failure of communication, to inform advanced air defense units that, hey, there's going to be this plane transiting your airspace between, 0900 and 1200 hours, and you are not to shoot it down. It is going to be a Russian transport aircraft, and it is bringing Ukrainian POWs. That's so you can lay out that it was just that kind of miscommunication. They failed to tell it, or given all of the Machiavellian machinations that are going on in Kiev between Zelensky versus Zaluzhny and Budanov, the head of intelligence, versus Zaluzhny or Zelensky. Who knows? Lots of palace coup plots. Maybe one element of the Ukrainian intelligence service ordered it to be shot down in order to embarrass Zelensky, force Zelensky out. That's another possibility. The other, another one I've heard is that the Ukrainians were led to believe that there were going to be high-level Russians on board this plane, very senior Russian officials. So therefore, they launched the attack to take them out without realizing that they were transporting the Ukrainian prisoners. Fog of war.
As you mentioned, this conflict between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, they're short in manpower, in ammunitions. With all this mess, who's running the show? Is Washington behind the scene, or is the Zelensky administration? It doesn't seem that Zelensky is that powerful to manage all of these difficulties.
Yeah, well, I think you're asking who's in charge. Nobody's in charge. That's part of the problem. Zelensky is pursuing his agenda. Zaluzhny's pursuing his agenda. Budanov pursuing his agenda. The United States can't figure out what its agenda is. Europe is trying to double down and say, "Oh boy, we're gonna back Ukraine to the hilt." Except Europeans are having trouble even being able to produce artillery shells or air defense systems. So it's a mess. And I think the Europeans are slowly coming to the realization that they're going to get United States is going to bail out of this. It's a non-starter. United States is going to become embroiled in a border defense battle, internal, a civil war, pitting the at least 25 states against the federal government in enforcing the security of the border. You've already got many other U.S. states sending troops to our southern border. So Ukraine's going to fall away. Just candidly, nobody cares about Ukraine. Only a few, exiles, or let's say people whose citizenship, their parents were Ukrainian or their grandparents were Ukrainian, and they hate the Russians, and they are concerned. And some of the neocon, the Zionists, they want to keep the war going. They hate Russia. But the majority of Americans really don't care, but what they do care about is, not sending money to Ukraine when that money could be used to secure our own border and improve our own cities, security in our cities. I noticed that in Washington D.C. last night, they just had somebody broke into 30 cars in a 2-hour period up in Northwest Washington, which traditionally, Washington's divided into 4 quadrants: Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, Southeast. Northwest is considered the upscale, the rich, the place where the people who normally get better protection live. So the fact that neighborhood's getting savaged this way just tells you about the state of that city. And, who cares about Ukraine at that point?
Stoltenberg just announced a new contract for the purchase of artillery shells worth 1.2 billion. He says that part of this bill goes to Ukraine. What's the strategy on the part of NATO right now?
Well, I mean, look at the specific. If I recall the specifics of that contract, those artillery shells are supposed to be delivered in what, 2027 or 2028? Hello, that's 3-4 years from now. It won't matter. Ukraine probably will not exist as a country as it's currently constituted in 2 years. So this is a meaningless gesture at best. It's the old, throw cow manure at a wall and hope something sticks. Well, they're in desperation mode, tossing this up. If Europe had a credible threat or a credible capability, they'd be producing the shells right now. They wouldn't have to wait. They wouldn't have to put it under contract. They'd be cranking them out. I mean, for God's sakes, the Brits can't even recruit enough people to fill out their army and their navy and their air force. And yet the Brits are supposed to be the elite of the military units in NATO. Give me a break. They're like a crippled poodle. Can barely walk, and they're not good for anything. Whatever, Britain's living off of its past glories, and this war with Ukraine and Russia has exposed NATO as the ultimate paper tiger, or just like this angry little dog yapping away, bark, 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 bark. We can't do anything. Has to stay in shelter.
When you look at the situation right now in Europe, you look at Germany, look at France, Poland, farmers are all on strike against the governments. And at the same time, you see the governments are talking about, especially in the United Kingdom and Germany, they're talking about fighting Russia. They're preparing to fight Russia. It seems that the sanity is going away. Why they're thinking of fighting Russia? Russia is their enemy, in your opinion?
Russia shouldn't be their enemy. Russia is not trying to be their enemy. It's the West that's decided to make Russia the enemy. It's the West that has decided to attack Russia. through proxies, using Ukraine as a proxy. This if this was a case of Russia as a homeowner shooting and killing a burglar who broke in this case, Ukraine, that would be considered a criminal act by Ukraine. If those people who gave the burglar the car to get to the house, the tools to break into the house, the guns to try to use against the homeowner, all those other countries would have been called accessories to that crime. Well, that's exactly what NATO is. NATO is an accessory to war crimes, period, and should be held accountable. But it won't, because under the international rules-based order that we hear so much about, it's the West that controls the rules. They get to make them up. They follow them when it suits their purpose. They ignore them when it suits their purpose. But that doesn't change the combat reality on the ground. NATO does not have the military wherewithal to defeat Russia, but they keep talking about it. And Russia has no intent of invading Europe. Good God. Why would they want to do that? Europe doesn't have anything they need. They don't need transgender people. They don't need active homosexual organizations. They don't need these corrupt labor unions, and they certainly don't need all of these buffoons who pass as politicians, whether Rishi Sunak, Macron, Schultz. Russia doesn't need to be saddled with that.
Larry, if you remember when this war started, Antony Blinken had an interview on CNN with Jake Tapper in which he was talking about the main goal of Russia in Ukraine. He said that Russia wants to subsume all of Ukraine and then march toward Europe. I recently read an article of Professor Nikolai Pedro. He was mentioning this as a key lie for this conflict in Ukraine. How it was possible for Washington to sell such a lie to Europeans?
Because the Europeans wanted to believe what the US was selling. Europe and the United States have one purpose. They want to take the resources of Russia. Russia is the #1 country in the world with natural resources. Europe wants the gas. Europe wants the oil. Europe wants the uranium. Europe wants the nickel, the fertilizer, the nitrogen, the aluminum. Europe wants it all, as does the United States. The only way to get it, you got to get rid of Putin. Because Putin put the oligarchs in their place over 20 years ago, where they had been making deals and allowing the resources of Russia to be stolen by foreigners. And Putin said, no, we're stopping that. That's not going to happen anymore. That's why the West hates Putin. He has stopped the rape. So, Europe is hell-bent on trying to break Putin, break Russia, so they can get access to the incredible wealth that Russia sits on. Russia isn't having any of it. And again, look at history. The only time the Russian army marched out of Russia proper and into a foreign city was in the 1814 in Paris, somewhere in there when they defeated Napoleon. But that entire thing was precipitated by Napoleon, who had invaded and burned Moscow. So it was always a reaction. The Russians were reacting. They've actually spent most of their history being invaded, whether it's by Mongol hordes or the Poles or the Finns or so Russia is very much a nationalist beast. They're very much keen on protecting the nation, but invading these other countries is just that's a Western fantasy.
In Germany, the leader of Alternative for Deutschland, he's talking about Dexit. It's come from Brexit. Is that a serious issue for Germany? Is Germany going toward Dexit?
I think you see not just Germany, movement across Europe that's calling into question what is the benefit of us being in the EU when there's so many negatives attached to it. So Hungary, it could be looking at it. Poland, similarly. Romania, the Netherlands. So yeah, the Brits started something, and it's now like the Brits are sort of trying to get back into the EU. They'd rather be part of that club than out of it. But the protests, farmer protests that you noted earlier, are a symptom of rising discontent with the European model. The average people, they don't want to be subject to a European decisions. They want to be able to live their own lives according to what the norms are in their local communities.
New polls in Hungary shows that 98% of people are against sending more aids and weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's huge, 98%. It's just landslide.
Yeah. So where's the support for doing the opposite? There isn't. And so the politicians, I guess, who can ignore what the people want may get away with it. But so at some point it's going to it'll come home to, as they say, the chickens will come home to roost. There will be blowback and payback and accountability demanded out of these politicians. Their attempt to create the global new order is just going down the toilet.
When they're talking about Orban, they're talking about he's pro-Russian.
What does it mean to be pro-Putin? Pro-Putin. I'm in favor of full employment. I'm in favor of overflowing stores and supermarkets where people can get whatever they need. I'm in favor of safe streets where there's no crime, where crime is virtually non-existent. I'm in favor of being able to control our own destiny. I'm in favor of promoting family values and having strong families. I'm in favor of providing women with maternity leave as soon as they become pregnant in order to promote having more children, in order to promote the growth of society. Is that what it means to be pro-Putin? Oh, and I'm in favor of defending our nation against Western imperialism. So if that's pro-Putin, yeah, I'd be pro-Putin. And I'm sure that's why Orban is pro-Putin, if they want to use that as a disparaging term. But sure beats being pro-Biden, I tell you, or pro-Rishi Sunak, or pro-Olaf Scholz. What a clown show. Or pro-Macron of France, or Trudeau of Canada. The Western leaders would look like they'd be trying out for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They're all the Seven Dwarfs. They may be physical stature, medium height, but in terms of intellectual stature and prestige, they're midgets.
We had Sweden joining NATO, and Turkey agreed on. When you look at Turkey right now, they were playing games with the United States to give us F-16s. We're going to let Sweden in. We know the Turks, they're after their national interest in all of these calculations with Russia, with the United States. The question is how long they're going to define their national interest together with the United States, as long as they have another option with Russia and China.
Well, let's be clear what happened. It was the legislature in Turkey that gave approval to allowing Sweden to become part of NATO. But I think there's still some other decision making that has to take place with Erdogan as the president. So it's not necessarily a done deal for Sweden. But Sweden adds nothing to NATO's military capability, which is weak already. It's just, this is one more excuse the West is looking for to create a tripwire that would allow the West to attack Russia. And Russia's, not going to give it to them. Turkey is in an interesting position. They did hold peace talks this week with the leader of Iran, and Erdogan met with him. Which, that's a step in a direction that have, over the last 10 years, really Iran and Turkey have been at odds with each other on different sides of the issue. It's fascinating, Iran wants to target the radical Islamists that are linked to ISIS in Syria. And that's what the United States claims that its troops are there for, to attack those radical Islamists, except there's growing evidence that the United States has been actually protecting some of those radical Islamists. And, here's Turkey also fighting them, actually wanting to fight the Kurds, which the United States is backing. And when you dig through it, you find out one of the things the United States is protecting a base, an oil station in Kurdistan, in Kurdish territory, that pumps its oil, sells it to Turkey, who then sells it to Israel. So what's going on there, this is part of using U.S. troops to defend an oil field that's serving the needs of Israel. That's what this is all about. And Turkey's making money off of it. So they're letting greed overcome the concepts of honor, dignity, and, despite the tough talk about Israel, Turkey doesn't match it. They're too busy selling oil, making money off the Israelis.
United States is sending nuclear missiles to the United Kingdom. What's the reason behind this, in your opinion?
Well, they've got to update. So the systems have been aging, but I think, as I recall, the British primary means of launching nuclear weapons would be from submarines, and they're having trouble deploying their submarine fleet. Number one. Then on top of that, they're having trouble finding a guy to command the submarines. They're posting an ad on LinkedIn. So, this is, I call it more sort of symbolic gesturing as opposed to actual providing a tactical change, or they're certainly not following any kind of strategy. Let's put it that way.
If something happens, let's assume something happens between NATO and Russia, it would be a war of attrition, or it can go nuclear.
I think the odds of it going nuclear are slight. There's always that risk. But I think the Russians are intent on they're on their way. They have defeated Ukraine. It's just a matter of time before Ukraine realizes that it's dead and it can't continue to fight. I don't know if you've ever seen a chicken with its head cut off. There is that expression, but literally we can cut the head off a chicken and the chicken continue running around for a while with headless, bleeding out until it falls over dead. That's sort of where Ukraine is right now.
In your opinion, is the US capable of sending European troops to fight Russia?
Who are they going to send? I mean, seriously, who are they going to send? You get like the purple-haired brigade out of Germany. You maybe have 30,000 combat-ready troops in the UK, maybe, and that's being generous. They'd be wiped out in a week. The French probably have the largest army after Turkey, but it's a joke. They're running this exercise this week, as I recall. There's an annual NATO military exercise, and I'm sure it involves some Ukrainian forces. And a lot of people say, "Oh, this is the 90,000. This is the largest ever." It may be the largest ever, but I think people are putting too much importance on it without realizing these exercises, they're planned 2 years out. So in other words, an exercise is taking place in March of 2024 was that they were doing the initial planning conference on it probably in March or April of 2022. So this is NATO's almost like a fantasy army, or these kids that go out and pretend that they're shooting each other with like laser tag. But in terms of actual real military capability to go out and engage and go toe to toe and fight the Russians, they don't have it. They get blasted, beaten quickly.
CNN reported about the inability of US Bradley IFVs with frosty conditions in Ukraine. Are they trying to modify these weapons because of these kind of problems that they're facing?
No. Dude, you know what your problem is, Nima? You are entirely too rational. You're entirely too logical to understand the craziness that's going on up here in the United States. They 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 don't see, you got that engineer mind. You see a problem and you say, okay, this is what we need to do to fix this. We'll do this, this, and this. That's not how these military bureaucracies think. Their thinking is, okay, which member of Congress is going to benefit from this, and which corporation can we give this contract to, because I'm going to get a job with them after I retire. And it doesn't matter whether the weapon system's any good, it's just that we can justify the contract. So you what the one of the I guess unexpected outcomes of this whole special military operation, at least from the Russian side, is they have been able to see firsthand how Western military equipment, not just US, but that of Brits and Germans and Italians and Spaniards, how it operates in the combat environment. And most of it's not very good. The Bradleys have probably been one of, I've seen Simplicius the thinker describe it as probably one of the more effective Western systems. But even then, they have trouble keeping it in the field. They have trouble maintaining it, and it's not very well armored, so it can be easily destroyed. So this is, what you described as far as seeing a problem with equipment and figuring out the fix. That's what the Russians are doing. The Russians are doing that big time across the board, where there's with drones, with missiles, with artillery, with vehicles. They are taking lessons learned and immediately addressing them and trying to get, corrections that are then moved to the field where they get to be proven again in combat.
Larry, there are rumors that the capital of Ukraine may be moved from Kiev to Lvov.
Well, it'll be a temporary fix for them. Their contingency planning, I'm sure, recognizes that Russia is likely to break through their defensive lines all along the 600-mile front. It'll put them right up on the eastern bank of the Dnieper. Again, Kiev is, sits on both sides of that river, parts of it do. And, Russia's going to ultimately take control of Kiev, and that it will not be used as the capital for Ukraine. Russia's going to eradicate reference the praise of and celebration of Stepan Bandera. They're going to be scorched earth when it comes to the Nazi thing. So yeah, the Ukrainian government, what's left of it, will probably retreat to Lvov. And then what? I'm pretty sure that by then Russia will also have retaken Odessa. So it'll have full control of the southern coast, and Ukraine, what's left of Ukraine, will become a landlocked country. Not very good for economic prospects.
It seems on the part of the Biden administration, in their mind, they're thinking that Russia cannot sustain such conflict in Ukraine. That's why they're trying to continue this war in Ukraine, because they're thinking that the big portion of their economy is going to the military industrial complex. That's why their economy gonna get weaker. Do you think, with what we've seen so far in Russia, is that logical in your opinion?
Oh no, it's divorced from reality. Yeah, that's why the West they genuinely believed. You're not making something up. They genuinely believed at the outset that this military pressure applied by Ukraine would suffice to cause tremendous economic woes for Russia, particularly with Western sanctions being applied, and that the Russian economy would implode, collapse upon itself. It wouldn't be able to sustain production. Well, just the opposite happened, because the West failed to take into account that the Russian economy is actually built upon factories and farms where people make stuff, they grow stuff, they mine stuff. It's actual real work. What takes place for economic activity in the United States is Nima, would you like to supersize your cheeseburger order? Or would you like fries with that order of chicken? So we got the service industry. We got the financial industry, selling stocks and bonds, investments, mergers, acquisitions, but nobody's making anything of any consequence. The the U.S. role as one of the leading steel makers in the world has been steadily eroding. And right now, the United States is not in a position where it can manufacture cruise missiles at the rate that they're being used up. Patriot missiles, or having to tell people, "Ooh, hold up, stop shooting those. You got to be more sparing because we can't reproduce them quick enough." And then Russia had alternatives. It didn't need the West. That's the key. The West still needs Russia, though. United States was one of the largest purchasers of Russian uranium last year. We needed to fire our nuclear power plants and our nuclear ships and submarines. But we wanted Europe to make the big sacrifice. Don't buy into that Russian oil and natural gas. They ignore us. We're going to go ahead and buy the uranium. It's hypocrisy, double standard. Pick your term.
We have seen shelling of a market in Donetsk. In your opinion, this was a problem of communication as well, as you mentioned?
No. It was deliberate. It was deliberate. They were gonna. The Ukrainians want to kill as many Russian civilians as possible, in hopes that that's going to create a political backlash against Vladimir Putin. It's one of these theories of warfare that goes back to, oh, good God, almost 100 years. It's what the United States and the United Kingdom used in the war against Britain. We're going to bomb all the cities. We're going to devastate the civilian areas. We killed upwards of 300, 400,000 German civilians. I've heard the numbers up as high as 900,000. But with the anticipation that this would cause the Germans to rise up in anger and overthrow Hitler. Well, that's what Ukraine wants to do now. They want the Ukrainian people, the Russian speakers in the Donetsk, to rise up and overthrow Vladimir Putin. Ain't going to happen. It ends up having the exact opposite effect. It actually ends up enraging people and making them more committed to defeating the foreigner who's attacking and killing their loved ones, make them more committed to seeking revenge against those who have inflicted damage on them. So it's a stupid policy.
In your opinion, are we going to have, with this sort of changing that are happening in Europe and these attacks, are we going to have some sort of false flag operations? Is that possible?
It's possible. They're going to, but Russia's proceeding at its pace with its operations of demilitarizing, denazifying Ukraine. And there's nothing the West can do to stop it. And that includes if the West decided we're going to mobilize all of NATO. We're going to deploy NATO forward and we're going to invade and push the Russians back. They'd never get it. They'd never be able to carry it out. Russia would destroy them before they got going. They do not understand. Russia is not an expeditionary military force. It's not a military or a nation that thrives on sending its troops overseas to kill little brown people. That's the United States. That's our gig. Just go around the world and list the number of victims that have been killed, starting with Vietnam and moving forward. The West is trying to fight somebody that is totally unprepared to fight. And unfortunately, sometimes the only way you learn that that's a mistake, that's a bad idea, is you pick a fight with that person and they just literally kick your ass. They pound you into submission. And then you wake up and say, oh boy, that was a bad idea. That's where I think we're headed.
It seems that Russia sent troops to Burkina Faso. They're trying to cooperate with the government there. Is it going to have any sort of precaution in the West, in your opinion?
Well, no, let's note that. So, and besides the Burkina Faso operation, as I recall, was with the Wagner Group, and Wagner was attached to the Russian intelligence organization, the GRU, military intelligence. So it sort of operated like CIA's Special Activities Division. So it was a way for the Russian government to project force, but again, that was doing that in response to an invitation from that country. Similarly, Syria, the Russians do have a military presence in Syria, and that was at the express invitation of the government of Syria. But apart from that, you don't see the Russians scampering around the world trying to figure out who they can invade or overthrow, which has not been the case with the United States. So what we're witnessing, though, is since 1990, up until I'd say February 2022, Russia was no longer considered to be a major player on the world stage because it still had nuclear weapons, but it was lost sort of its superpower status. I think what's happened over the last 2 years, Russia is in the process of reestablishing its superpower status. And it's done so by aligning itself with China, strengthening BRICS with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So it moves on a broad diplomatic front with what's known as the global South, has really made important progress. And by contrast, it's the United States that's been losing influence and been suffering setbacks, not the Russians.
It seems that the United States is planning to withdraw from Syria. Do you think that the mission for the United States is done in Syria right now?
Well, what's the mission? Ask yourself that. The one mission that I can see is its job is to protect an oil pumping station that's linked to the Kurds, because that oil goes to Turkey and then makes its way to Israel. This is part of protecting Israel. That's all it is. It's an illegal occupation of Syria. There is no justification under international law for the United States to be there and to maintain troops there. I think part of the rationale that's, the reason that they're talking about pulling them out is they're just sitting ducks. They're going to be constantly mortared, rocketed, missiled by these Iranian-backed groups that are going to continue to attack the United States as long as Israel continues to attack the Gazans, the Palestinians in Gaza.
Right now in Gaza, they're slowing down their operations, or are they changing their strategy in Gaza?
I don't think they've changed their strategy. Their long-term strategy remains: depopulate Gaza, eliminate the Palestinians, create it as either a buffer zone or an area of new habitation by Israeli settlers. That's Israel's goal. Their ability to accomplish that has come into question now. They've been taking significant casualties in their military operations. And in fact, just the other day, they reportedly had cleared out the northern part of Gaza of all the Hamas fighters. Now they're reporting that all the Hamas fighters have flooded back into that zone. The Hamas pulled off an inspiring ambush for them, where they caught 21 Israelis inside a house or inside a big structure, wiring it to blow it up. And Hamas was able to get it blown up and in the process, it collapsed on the Israelis, killed 21 of them. And then 3 more were killed outside as part of a continuing attack. So that's 24 in one day. They continue to die. Israelis continue to die at the rate of 2 or 3, which is a fraction of the number of Palestinians that are dying. But Israel's stomach for enduring such losses is becoming, they're losing their appetite. They're losing the will to continue this. There's growing opposition. I know there's been some discussion. Judge Napolitano has talked about it, this one Israeli mother whose son was a member of the Israeli armed forces. He'd been kidnapped, taken prisoner by Hamas on October 7th. He was gassed. They used poison gas in one of these tunnels, and he died of poison gas, just like what the Nazis did to the Jews at Auschwitz. The irony was not lost on the mother, and she was just completely outraged and angered over it. So, what you're seeing is, do I believe that Israel, through bombing, shelling, could ultimately wipe out the Palestinians and force them out? Yeah, I do. It would come at an incredible cost, though. Cost of both human lives of Israeli soldiers and loss of any kind of standing with the international community, where Israel would be ultimately isolated, and even countries like the United States and Great Britain would distance themselves from them. I think there's already that possibility in the United States. What's fascinating, so a lot of people think about it with the old model, what I'll call the wealthy Jewish donor model. You do have a lot of wealthy Jews, people like Bill Ackman, who have been aggressive in supporting Israel. But there's a generational transformation underway. And so an overwhelming majority of Americans under the age of 40 back Palestine, back the Palestinians, despise Israel, and think that the United States should not support Israel. Well, that's an important change. And you're seeing it reflected on the campaign trail. That's what's really fascinating. So Joe Biden shows up to talk about abortion, and the crowd jumps up and calls him Genocide Joe, and you call ceasefire now for Palestine. He shows up to talk about the economy with auto workers. Same thing. I heard Max Blumenthal say that he was interrupted 13 times in a speech. Well, if you watch Biden's facial expression when this is happening, it's a combination of this. He's looks lost, like, oh, where am I? Or it's anger. It's like, how dare you interrupt? So, it's happened at every single event he's had in the last 2 weeks. It's not like we're talking of one off or an occasional thing, happening every time. So these groups, and they're not jumping on Donald Trump, they're jumping on Joe Biden. These are groups normally sympathetic. And then within the Democrat base, you've got the Muslims that have come to dominate in certain areas like Michigan. They used to think, oh, well, the Democrats are our friends. No longer. They're refusing to endorse and support Biden, and probably some other Democrats. So this is turning into a political problem for the Democrats. Media hasn't really focused on it much. And, they're having to make a decision. Are we going to alienate our wealthy Jewish donors, or are we going to keep our base that's going to actually come out and vote for us? Because if you got all this money, but you can't, the voters are telling you to go screw yourself, pound sand, all the money in the world's not going to get them to vote for you. You got to be right on the issues. So that pressure is going to continue to grow. And then with the decision of the International Court of Justice basically saying, yeah, we think the South African complaint accusing Israel of committing genocide has merit, and that Israel needs to stop and doing some of the things it's doing, and needs to punish people who have been making comments referring to the Palestinians as subhuman Untermensch. So that's going to continue to weigh into this process, where the point with both countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and the United States could be accused of being accessories to genocide. I can tell you a lot of, at least the French don't want to be any part of that, and the Germans are going to have second thoughts. So it's, this is, we got some genuine turmoil here is the way to look at it.
For the situation that we're having in Israel, that we have some sort of monopoly of Netanyahu and his party, Likud party. Why there is no alternative? Who's to blame for that? Are these
Well-
donors in the United States? Are the presidents of the United States from both parties?
Well, you've got a combination of things. I mean, we used to think of Likud as being the most extreme. And let me define extreme, because I don't like to use the terms right wing, whatever that means. The extreme position we're talking about is they don't see the Palestinians as human beings. They don't see the Palestinians as having a legitimate right to live in territory that Israel considers Israeli territory. Then they see that they do not believe that the Palestinians are entitled to any rights. They believe that the Palestinians can be detained at will. They can be held in prison as long as they want without charges, and believe that they can shoot them. Unarmed people, shoot them because of the threat they represent. The Likud party has joined with these settlers, these parties that have strong ties to settlers who've, illegally occupied territory in the West Bank. And people like Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. They are two of the most prominent ones. Both, in my understanding, have been charged with terrorism and convicted of terrorism in the past in Israel. And yet Netanyahu has joined forces with these terrorists, which in my view makes Netanyahu a terrorist as well. He's good at hiding behind the Holocaust. He likes to trot out the Holocaust as justification for Israel creating a new Holocaust for Palestinians. But there is, Likud is a fraction, it's a fractious unity. So it cobbled together this agreement with these minority parties to have enough that they secured a bare majority. But there is a strong opposition to them. And I think with each passing day, the odds of that opposition party led by Benny Gantz, I think it is, ultimately they're going to force Netanyahu out. Now, it may not necessarily result in a dramatic change in Israeli policy, but because right now you got some in Israel on the Netanyahu's side are advocating expanding the war into Lebanon. Madness, sheer madness. If they go into Lebanon, Israel is going to suffer a military defeat like it has never suffered, which may in fact call into question the very existence of Israel. It could be that severe. And they, some cooler heads ought to prevail to talk them out of it. Because if they don't, they're going to commit suicide.
It seems that the U.S. Navy tried to reopen the Suez Canal route, but they couldn't do that. What was the problem there?
Yeah, that's I posted the meme of the big bad wolf with the three little pigs. Think of the Houthis. Now I realize they're Muslim and they consider pork unclean, but think of the Houthis as the three little pigs in their brick house. And here's the United States as the big bad wolf. I'm going to huff, I'm going to puff, and I'm going to blow your house up. Not down, up. I'm going to blow it up. And here are the Houthis. They fired another missile today, hit another oil tanker. And the two tankers that the U.S. Navy ship was accompanying, they turned around. Oh, wait a second. Reverse. We're out of here. So what it's exposing is the United States Navy has limited power. It's not a magical force. It can't overcome time and gravity and the shortages of materials. It has limited firepower. Yeah, it can fire off missiles. It can fire off $2 million missiles that shot at two per incoming target. Hey, that's $4 million up in air, taking out maybe, let's say, a $300,000 missile. So the economics work in the favor of the Houthis. And the Houthis have been very clear. Hey, if your ship is owned by the Israelis or is servicing Israel, or the United States or the United Kingdom, we're going to shoot you. If you're Russian, Chinese, Indian, Panamanian, if you're not doing anything with Israel, go on through. We're not going to bother you. You're not going to have a problem. And they've held up to that. They've, you know, the irony is this little country of Yemen, you know, some would, you know, Donald Trump would call it a shithole. It is holding at bay the United States and the United Kingdom, preventing them from opening the Red Sea, preventing them from ensuring freedom of navigation for everyone. And the Houthis are real clear. No, you're not getting anything in and out of Israel until they stop killing Palestinians. They're the only country in the Middle East actually taking substantive action to try to defend the people of Palestine.
China is declaring NATO a walking war machine.
Yeah. Well, at least we know the Chinese aren't delusional, right? They're paying attention. Yeah, give those Chinese some, hey, props. Hey, guys, you good analysis. Thank you, Captain Obvious.
But Larry, what's the problem in Asia Pacific region?
I got a heads up from a friend of mine who's in the military, and he said that there is a big battle underway, bureaucratic battle. You know, nobody's shooting at each other, but the generals that are in you know, the 4 stars, and so we could be talking admirals or generals that are in Indo-PACOM. So that's the area that covers India and Pacific theater, including China, Philippines, that they are battling with the Central Command, and the Central Command's Air Force called CENTAF. So basically it's a fight over who's going to get the most air assets. Indo-PACOM wants more air assets and wants it taken away from Central Command because they're getting ready to fight China. It's in their battle plans. And Central Command's fighting back. No, we need those aircraft so we can bomb the Houthis into the Stone Age, even though they're living in the Stone Age. You know, that kind of nonsense. So that's, you know, you got that back and forth. And it doesn't appear it's not being driven necessarily by policy, but the entire United States policy is, as the Chinese foreign minister said, it's a walking war machine. You know, it's intent on starting a fight wherever it goes, because that serves ultimately the U.S. economy is well served if we've got a lot of defense industries getting billions of dollars to make weapons that don't necessarily work or make no strategic sense. But by God, it you know, keeps those political contributions flowing to members of Congress, and that's really important.
Larry, what's the problem right now between the Biden administration and the governor of Texas?
Governor Abbott of Texas finally got off of his ass and deployed the National Guard with orders to put up barbed wire fencing to keep this flood of illegal migrants out, particularly around Eagle Pass, Texas. Well, the Border Patrol, or at least some in the Border Patrol, said, oh, no, we need to cut that down so we can let these migrants through. And Texas said no. And so the Biden administration appealed this, you know, saying, hey, we're the federal government. We got the right to decide this. And the Supreme Court ruled 5-4, said, okay, well, the federal agents can go cut down the barbed wire. But there's also a clause in the Constitution. I think it's in Article 3. And what it says is that the federal government has supremacy in all these matters unless a state is invaded. If it's invaded and the federal government's not doing anything, the state can do whatever it needs to defend itself. That's what it says in the Constitution. And that's what Governor Abbott's saying, by God, we are being invaded. The federal government's not stopping it. The federal government's not enforcing the law. So we're going to fight back. We're going to do it. And on top of it, 25 other states have weighed in with Governor Abbott and said, we're